Hello, this is a special edition of Why We Are Christians. It's called Christian Basics. Actually, we're on lesson 5 in our book. Katie, my wife here, we're working together.
The book is Christian Basics.
Christian Basics. By the way, you can get it on Amazon.com.
Or wherever you buy your books.
Anyway, this is lesson 5. We're talking about the New Testament. We like to mention it as the Greek Bible. I wrote it 5 years ago. If I had it to do over again, it would this lesson will be called the Greek Bible. All right, okay. Katie, get us started.
I'm going to read the beginning of this chapter, lesson 5. The New Testament is comprised of 27 books. Most of these are letters or epistles. Epistle is the Greek word for letter. The epistles were more than letters and ushered in a new type of biblical literature since they laid out key doctrines of the Christian faith. 4 of the books are gospels, or messages of good news. Gospel is a Middle English word that means good message. Following the gospels comes a history book known as Acts. And the last book of the Bible, Revelation, is a different genre altogether, being an apocalyptic book, a book of revealing that which had been hidden.
Okay, well, I'm glad you got through that paragraph.
Yeah, me too.
So we're talking about the fact that this New Testament, the Greek Bible, is written in Greek. That's why I like the idea of the Greek Bible. Some of it is very polished Greek, by the way, and the book of Hebrews is probably the best Greek in the Greek Bible. There are 3 kinds of Greek. There's classical Greek, which would have been prior to the days of Jesus. Then there was koine, K-O-I-N-E, or common. We get a word coin from it. That was the kind of Greek that was spoken in the first century. And then there's modern Greek. Koine is the kind of Greek we find in the New Testament. This lesson is intended to acquaint everybody with the general makeup of the New Testament. For many, if not most Christians, it becomes a rich and constant source of inspiration, guidance, and encouragement. Okay, Katie, get us started with the Gospels.
Yes. Well, here are the major sections, and the first major section is what we said, the Gospels, that good spell or the good word, and they are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The first 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are referred to as synoptic Gospels because they have a similar account of the life and ministry of Jesus. They're alike, sin-like. John's Gospel is more of a theological treatment of the life and teachings of Jesus. And of course, he wrote them much later. Matthew and John were called apostles, 2 of the 12 disciples originally called by Jesus. Mark was Peter's companion, and thus his Gospel is sometimes referred to as Peter's Gospel. And Luke was Paul's companion. Thus, the Gospels were written either by an apostle or a disciple of an apostle.
Right. It's thought that Mark was written first, perhaps as early as AD 50. I would say that there is thought to have been another document that existed prior to Mark. We know that the oral tradition was an oral tradition that existed. It is speculated that the document called Q, or from Quelle, from the German, was an original source, kind of an outline of the life of Jesus.
Writing down of sayings.
Yeah, there was the oral tradition, and then this manuscript that apparently that Mark used, and maybe Matthew, maybe even Luke, but the earliest gospel would have been Mark. And then Matthew and Mark's Gospel may be dated in the 60s, 60s, generally between 63, 64, 65. At minimum, these 3 synoptic Gospels, it means with the same view,
right,
according to most biblical scholars, were written before the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 CE, because the destruction of the temple is not mentioned at all. Now, dates for John's Gospel vary from 88 to about 95.
At least a whole generation later.
a whole generation. John was the only apostle not to die at the hands of, he wasn't a martyr, didn't die at the hands of the Romans. There are no original manuscripts of any Gospels extant today, and thus there are no signature originals.
If they even did that.
Yeah, no apostle or disciple of an apostle signed a gospel, nor directly indicated authorship. John, you can figure out who wrote it with a little study, but tradition, coupled with biblical analysis, substantially indicates who the authors are. There are some who dispute both authorship and her dating, but generally there is a consistent agreement about both.
All right. Anything else about the Gospels you want to talk about?
Oh, we could go on and on.
Forever and ever, amen?
Ever and ever. One of the interesting things is that Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell the same stories, but they don't have the same wording.
Similar.
If it was going to be a document that somebody was going to create to dupe people, they make everything align perfectly.
Right.
But they don't. These Gospels existed, were passed around by the churches in that part of the world for many, many decades, but they began to be collected by the churches. Anything with Paul's name on it, anything to do with John or Peter, and of course the accounts of Jesus, these were collected by churches all over the place. And so we have a very interesting history we don't have time to go into, but it lends itself to extreme credibility. Okay,
so then, following the Gospels is the book of Acts. Okay, so Luke.
Now Acts, we don't know if it's the Acts of Peter, Acts of Paul, Acts of the early church, Acts of the Holy Spirit. We don't know what Acts is referring to. It doesn't say, but...
Well, by the fact that it doesn't say, we can say it's about all of that. Okay, so Luke is definitely considered the author. He wrote the third gospel, and he also wrote Acts. Tradition and biblical sleuthing or analysis confirms this.
Now, the date of the writing of Acts is usually stated to be from 62 to 65, since there's no mention in either Luke or Acts of the destruction of Jerusalem, or even mention of the Jewish rebellion against Rome that began in 66 CE. It's thought that when Paul was in prison, Luke was his companion. He was his physician, took care of Paul, and during that stay wrote both Luke and Acts, or like Volume 1 and Volume 2.
Right.
So it's easily assumed that both documents were written before 66 CE, because there's no the rebellion of Israel against Rome began in 66, and there's nothing hints at that in Acts.
No. So then, after Acts, we have a series of letters by Paul. They are Romans, 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, and Philemon.
Now, most of these books were written to churches. Church at Rome, church at Corinth. Galatia was an area in modern-day Turkey, and a number of churches Paul had visited and so on. The church at Ephesus, church at Philippi, Colossae, Thessalonica, and then Timothy and Titus were his companions.
Yes.
He was training them.
Pastoral epistles.
And then Philemon was written to a rich man in Colossae.
Yes.
Who had a slave by the name of, can't remember his name right now.
Onesimus.
Okay, Onesimus. And Paul wrote a letter to say, he served me well. I'd like you to free him if you would. Okay.
So the dates for these books vary greatly. The earliest one we consider to be Galatians, probably written in 49 or thereabouts. It's probably Paul's first letter. And then the two letters to Timothy that we call pastoral epistles are much later. They're at the end of Paul's life, and they could be from 65 CE or later. There's a continuing debate as to all of the dates of Paul's letters, and I'm not sure exactly why, but that is a very complex situation. We have some idea that he might have done more travels than what are indicated by the letters, and so there's this thing: did he go here or did he go there, and when might he have, and whatnot. So it's we can't get too involved with that here.
The linguistic analysis comes into play here, and you can determine that Paul, the same person, wrote these 13 letters. It was long thought that Paul wrote the letter called Hebrews, but upon analysis,
different kind of Greek,
vocabulary, style, is syntax,
really different.
Not Paul at all, a different writer altogether, and so that we're just getting into the Hebrews, letter to Hebrews. Go ahead, Katie.
Okay, so the letter to the Hebrews. The date for Hebrews is unknown, but it's likely written just before, I would say, the destruction of the temple at Jerusalem in 70 CE. It is thought such an event would have been at least mentioned in Hebrews.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Because it talks about how they worship here versus there, meaning inside Jerusalem versus outside Jerusalem, and he wouldn't have worded it that way if Jerusalem was destroyed. The author of Hebrews is unknown. We just discussed that it was decided it was not Paul. Prior to the last few decades, it was traditionally credited to Paul, but stylistic issues preclude Paul's authorship, and scholars have proposed the author variously to be Barnabas, Apollos, Silas, Aquila and Priscilla even, among others, and Hebrews is the best example of polished Greek writing in the New Testament.
Right. Hebrews is a fascinating book. It's very difficult. I consider the two most difficult books to understand in the Greek Bible to be Hebrews and Romans.
Yeah.
Of course, there's complexities with the book of Revelation, but not so much when you get behind the schematic of the book of Revelation. But Hebrews is very complex and fleshes out so much of one of the themes from the Hebrew Bible. But it's beautifully done. And some of the most wonderful passages are found in the book of Hebrews.
Mm-hmm. Then we go to James. James is the author, likely, and he is the half-brother of Jesus, who's mentioned in the Gospels and Acts. He became the first pastor of the Jerusalem church and directed the Council of Jerusalem as recorded in Acts 15. That was the first time that they had to get together and decide, what do we do with all the Gentiles who are believing in our Messiah?
Yes, we had the Christian Jewish community had a real problem here on their hands. What are we going to do?
Yes.
We got these Gentiles who are coming in, and we've got to circumcise them.
Oh no, we shouldn't have to.
Yeah,
so that was the argument.
And it was James. Now James is the half brother of Jesus. Jesus had four brothers. You see, James, Joseph,
Jude.
Simon, and Jude.
Yeah, right.
And we're going to get to those two guys because James and Jude have books in the Greek Bible.
And here is the first of those.
And by the way, Jesus had at least two sisters.
Because they're not mentioned by name, but by plural in a passing reference.
And one of the passages says, "Are not all his sisters?"
Sisters.
All his sisters.
Yeah, that's
so. Mary and Joseph had a big family.
Yeah.
And they all were apparently involved in the new Christian community. So it was James who made the decision said, yes, this is what we're going to do.
We're going to do.
The Gentiles do not have to be circumcised,
right.
which is huge. Okay.
That is really big. Okay, then the date. It could be as early as 45 CE, making it possibly the earliest Christian document, and James himself died in 62.
He was known as James the Just, and when he died, it was said that all Jerusalem mourned. One of the interesting things that comes out of that history, I don't know if it was Josephus who noted that or not, but it may have been.
Well, what I find interesting is that James and the rest of the family, except maybe his mother, didn't know who he was when he was still on earth in normal existence, and didn't necessarily follow him or believe that he was the Messiah. So it was a change that happened to them after his death and resurrection.
Right. Now we're going to go to 1st and 2nd Peter. The authorship of 1 Peter is debated, but is fairly well agreed upon. In the opening sentence, 1 Peter 1:1, the author identifies himself as Peter and states he was an eyewitness to the sufferings of Jesus. The same is true for 2 Peter, which has an even stronger case for Peter's authorship than 1 Peter. I remember a number of times reading the debate about, do we have the same guy in 1 Peter or 2 Peter? And a reason would be stylistic, vocabulary, syntax, etc.
Well, sometimes they used what we call, amanuensis?
Yes. Now, sometimes they would have somebody who would write for them. There was always a question as, could Peter write?
Right. Yeah, he was a fisherman.
Could those Galileans, those fishermen that started about age 13, could they write? And could they write in good Greek?
Right. So.
By the way, I would like to point out that the Greek Bible is written in Greek.
Yes.
In Greek.
Not Aramaic.
Not Aramaic, not Latin.
Yeah, right.
Not any other language. Might be helpful to mention that there's over 5,000 manuscripts of the Greek New Testament.
That's
There's
right.
more than that, but we always round it off to 5. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of other languages like Coptic, Syriac, Georgian, Armenian,
right, wherever they
all
ended
kinds of
up,
different languages, and these get analyzed by computer now. And it is
they
said
can figure out where they all kind of come back down to.
It's said that the New Testament is reliable, that we're looking at the original readings about 97%. About 97% of the time.
And the rest of it is
nothing of that
major significance, right.
But I love that, because nobody got a hold of the Bible and said, oh, we've got to straighten out all the problems. We've got to get everything straight. No, that did not happen. Easy to show. Let's see.
The date of 1 Peter may be 62 or 63.
Okay, Peter, that's Peter. We know he died pretty close to the middle of that century, that decade.
Under Nero.
Under Nero. That he died under Nero, AD 54 to 68, and probably, according to tradition, died by crucifixion, which he himself requested to be done upside down, and this was anywhere from 64 to 67 CE. It is speculated that Peter wrote 2 Peter shortly before his martyrdom.
Then that martyrdom might have had something to do with the big fire in Rome that got blamed on the Christians.
That's right. So Peter's grammar, his Greek is not the best. It's not the best, but it's very credible and understandable. And it would have been his second language. He probably would have grown up speaking Aramaic, but also fairly early on Greek, because up in Galilee,
Right.
people had a tendency to speak Greek
Merchant
because of
area,
the
trade
closeness
area.
of the Greco-Roman world.
Next comes Jude. Okay, Jude is another, or the other, half-brother of James, or half-brother of Jesus, the full brother of James. And there's little disagreement over the authorship. So there's a close similarity between Jude and 2 Peter, and the date of Jude is reckoned to be close to that of 2 Peter, so therefore about 65 CE.
There's no indication of when Jude became finally recognized who his brother was. His name actually is Judas.
Yeah,
Judas.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to confuse him with that other guy named Judas.
But which I'm, hoping to write a book about. I've already got it started. The biggest, most interesting character outside of a few in the Greek Bible is Judas. But okay, now we're looking at 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, the book of Revelation. Now, John was an apostle. He was probably a mid-teenager.
Yeah, he was the youngest.
When he started.
For sure.
He had a brother named James. His last name was Zebedee. They were fishermen up in the Sea of Galilee. Probably lived northern part of the Sea of Galilee.
Yeah, poor James. He was about the first martyr.
His brother James was the first to die as a Christian in that period. But he wrote 3 letters. 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. 2nd and 3rd are very short, but 1st John is fascinating.
Yes.
Fascinating.
We recite from that every Sunday.
All the time. So those 3 letters, and they were what you'd call general epistles. Mm-hmm. They were written for all of the church. So John was the one who Jesus gave the care of his mother to. Mm-hmm. He was the only apostle who was at the cross when Jesus was crucified. The rest scattered. Mm-hmm. And he was finally, because of his influence, exiled to the Isle of Patmos. I've been there. Isle of Patmos, saw the cell, where he probably wrote at least the book of Revelation. Mm-hmm. So they were afraid of John because he was something, and he had some.
And so this was in the last decade of the 1st century, yes?
Yeah, and he had some people that he discipled, like Polycarp and so on, and who wrote stories about John. So we have all this extra biblical material about John, and a lot of the people who knew him, Papias and Polycarp and so on. Okay. So, and also the book of Revelation. 3rd John is often debated as to authorship, we have to admit. John didn't sign, he called himself, what did he call himself, the elder?
Yes.
In 2nd and 3rd John, he referred to himself as the elder. Didn't identify himself as John. So we get a chance to debate these kinds of things. Okay.
So do we have time for?
Yes, we do. We're going to get the major themes.
All right.
But anyway, the prologue to the book of Revelation, chapter 1, verse 1, says the writer is John.
Okay.
All right. Now we're going to do the major themes of the Bible. We got 4 minutes. We got time. Okay. We got 6 major themes. Katie, go get the first one.
Number 1, the Word, who is God, became flesh and actually lived among people.
Okay. The Word, Logos.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and walked among us.
That's right. This word, very difficult to translate its meaning. You'd have to go into a long survey of how the word was used in the first couple of centuries before the Christian era. But it was the wisdom, the one Almighty, the powerful one, and the idea of word is spoken, who speaks. Mm-hmm. This grandest of all deity, as mentioned by some of the ancient writers. But this word, this Logos, who is God, became flesh and actually lived among people. Now, we find this as a theme throughout the Hebrew Bible. Okay, second, Katie.
The Word, or Logos, is Jesus of Nazareth, born of the Virgin Mary in Bethlehem. This event marks the beginning of the designation AD, or Anno Domini, Year of the Lord, after the Lord's birth.
Okay. By the way, the
However,
dating system is flawed.
Yes.
We have a footnote on that. I'll just read it. The dating system has a flaw in that Jesus was born before the death of Herod the Great, who died in 4 BC. Probably Jesus was born around 6 BC in our present dating system. Now that might mess you up a little bit, not too bad. Number 3.
Oh, good. It's only 2013. Go ahead.
Okay, the third theme. Jesus is a direct descendant from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then through the tribe of Judah, the son of Jacob, and also through the clan of King David, thus fulfilling the prophecies spoken of for the Messiah. So This is one of the great themes, where the Messiah comes from. And in both the genealogies in Matthew 1 and in Luke 3, Jesus is born Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Judah, and David.
Okay.
So perfectly fits the requirements for the Messiah.
And talking about the word Messiah, we come next to Jesus is the Christ, with Christ being the Greek form for the Hebrew Mashiach, meaning Messiah or anointed one. He called disciples, taught them over the course of 3 to 5 years, healed the sick, cast out demons, raised the dead, commanded nature, multiplied organic matter, and was then betrayed, arrested, condemned, and crucified, all in accordance with Old Testament prophecy.
These themes that you see, they're all there. We'd like to say you wouldn't need a Greek Bible at all. You wouldn't need a New Testament at all, because it's all in the Hebrew Scripture. It's all there. It's all right there. 5, Jesus was raised from the dead on a Sunday, appeared to his disciples over the course of 40 days, and then ascended to heaven from whence he had come. 6.
And Jesus established his church, for which he promised to return at the close of the age.
These are the great themes of the Hebrew Bible.
And we await that last one with bated breath all the time.
That's right. A lot of times people have predicted when this is going to happen, but most of us say it is unpredictable. Not predictable, not worried about it. It's just going to happen in due time. All right, that's lesson 5 in the New Testament of the Greek Bible. So long.